Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something that honestly feels pretty countercultural right now. It's this idea of a radical, almost uncompromising commitment to truth.
Yeah, and not just in a philosophical sense. We're looking at it through a psychological lens. We've got some really interesting sources here. Cognitive science, psychoanalysis, even trauma theory.
Exactly. And the core message seems to be that lying, especially lying to yourself, isn't just some minor character flaw. It's actually, well, it's corrosive.
It really is. It damages your mental health, messes with your sense of self, and fundamentally disconnects you from what's real.
So our mission today is to pull out the practical insights.
Yeah.
How is honesty, particularly that tough internal honesty, the foundation for getting psychologically healthy, for becoming whole again?
We're defining truth here as a psychological necessity. It's about constantly aligning your inner world, your thoughts, feelings, beliefs, with the actual external reality.
Which sounds simple, but it's often difficult, painful even.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
And when that alignment breaks down, the whole system starts to glitch.
So we want to understand, how do these internal lies even get started? What's the architecture of self-deception? And then, crucially, how do we start taking it apart?
Right. And a good place to start is probably the most common mechanism, that mental juggling act we do, just to feel okay about ourselves.
Okay, yeah, let's dig into that. This fundamental drive we have to feel consistent. We're talking Leon Festinger's cognitive dissonance theory, right?
Exactly. And it's key to get that dissonance isn't just an abstract problem. It feels bad. It's like a psychological itch you desperately need to scratch. We naturally want our beliefs, our opinions, our actions. We want them all to line up neatly.
Makes sense. So if I think, okay, I really value being healthy, but then I find myself eating cake for breakfast every day.
Right there. That's the conflict. You have two contradictory cognitions. Health is important, and I am eating cake for breakfast. That creates this tension, this discomfort.
And that discomfort is what pushes us to, well, to lie to ourselves.
It pushes us to reduce the dissonance somehow. And often the easiest way involves some kind of reality distortion. The mind basically hits the panic button and tries to smooth things over.
So how do we do that? What are the tricks our minds play?
Well, the sources point to a few common ones. A big one is, selectively focusing. You emphasize all the good things about the choice you made.
Okay, like buying that expensive car. You focus on the smooth ride, the cool features.
Exactly. The consonant elements. And you actively downplay or ignore the crippling monthly payments. The dissonant element. You sort of conveniently forget the downside.
Or minimize the positives of the thing you didn't choose.
Precisely. You rewrite the narrative to make your choice feel like the obviously correct one, even if objectively it wasn't.
But it's not just internal, is it? We kind of recruit others into our self-deception, too.
Oh, massively. That's confirmation seeking. When you're feeling that dissonance, maybe after a big decision or when your behavior is clearly out of line with your values, you tend to gravitate towards people who agree with you.
You seek out your echo chamber.
Exactly. Your social circle becomes a resource. They feed you those consonant cognitive elements, as Festinger called them. They validate your choice, reinforce your rationalizations.
So if I, let's say, strongly believe something politically controversial, I'll spend more time with people who believe the same thing, and that makes it easier to dismiss contradictory evidence.
It makes it much easier. The social support acts like a buffer against the discomfort of conflicting information. It helps scaffold the lie.
We saw this with things like smoking, right? Even with overwhelming evidence about lung cancer.
Yes. The classic studies showed that heavy smokers, especially those with lots of friends who also smoked, were much more likely to downplay the risks or find reasons to disbelieve the science. The social network provided the necessary support to maintain the convenient but dangerous belief. The shared lie reduced the dissonance of knowing their habit was harmful.
It's fascinating how powerful that drive for consistency is. Even forcing someone to act against their beliefs can change the belief itself.
Right, the forced compliance studies. You pay someone a tiny amount, like $1, to tell someone else that a really boring task was actually interesting.
And because $1 isn't really enough justification to lie outright.
Exactly. There's dissonance. I believe this task was boring versus I just said it was interesting for almost no reason. So to reduce that dissonance, what often happens?
Their opinion starts to shift. They actually start to think the task wasn't quite so bad after all.
The mind adjusts the belief to match the behavior, because changing the belief is psychologically easier than admitting you lied for a trivial reason.
Wow. So the action dictates the belief in that case.
Often, yes. The key takeaway here is that the lie, the self-deception, it's the mental energy we spend, the contortions we go through, just to lessen the psychic pain of knowing our actions don't line up with our values or beliefs.
And often, tweaking the truth feels like the path of least resistance compared to, changing the actual behavior.
Absolutely. Which leads us nicely into some deeper, more primal mechanisms of distortion. If dissonance is about managing conscious conflicts, Freud's ideas about the ego take us to the very roots of how we start bending reality in the first place.
Okay, so moving from the sort of logical mind games of dissonance to something more instinctual.
You could say that. We're talking about the primitive ego operating purely on the pleasure principle. Its main goal is immediate gratification and avoiding unpleasure at all costs.
So anything painful, uncomfortable, frustrating, the ego just wants it gone.
Instantly, its tendency is to detach from it, push it away, repress it, almost like a reflex.
Like a mental immune system attacking anything that feels bad.
That's a good way to put it. And over time, this process helps create our sense of self defined by what feels good, what belongs inside, versus this outside world that's seen as potentially threatening or painful.
And be able to tell the difference between inside and outside, between self and other, that's fundamental for, well, sanity.
It's absolutely crucial. Distinguishing between an uncomfortable internal reality, like a feeling or a memory, and an actual external threat is the bedrock of psychological health.
So where does it go wrong? When does this turn into pathological self-deception?
It goes wrong when the ego starts using the exact same defense mechanisms, pushing away, repressing, denying against internal experiences as it does against external threats.
Wait, so it treats its own feelings, like sadness, or maybe a forbidden desire,
Right.
as if they were an outside enemy.
Precisely. When you start trying to expel or deny your own internal states because they cause unpleasure, you're fundamentally confusing your inner landscape with an external danger. That's where severe self-deception and internal chaos begin. You're at war with parts of yourself.
And this might explain why things like addiction or maybe self-sabotaging behaviors feels so compelling sometimes. There's a kind of immediate, intense payoff.
There's a powerful economic incentive, as Freud might put it. The sources point out that the happiness or pleasure you get from satisfying a raw, untamed, instinctual impulse. It's felt as way more intense than the pleasure from a controlled, delayed, or socially acceptable impulse.
The forbidden fruit tastes sweetest, essentially.
Incomparably so, from the perspective of the primitive ego. That immediate wild burst of satisfaction, whether it's from a binge, an outburst, breaking a rule, offers a massive, short-term psychic reward.
Even though you know rationally there will be consequences.
The intensity of the immediate pleasure often outweighs the anticipated future cost. And then to manage the fallout, you need more self-deception. You have to rationalize the act, minimize the harm, tell yourself it was worth it, or that it didn't really happen the way it did.
So one impulsive act, fueled by that primitive pleasure principle, can create a need for a whole cascade of subsequent lies just to maintain psychological equilibrium.
Exactly. It sets up a dangerous cycle. Intense gratification requires layers of deception to maintain the functional illusion. And that internal split, that division between the act and the story you tell yourself about it, that's where the erosion of identity really begins.
Okay, so we've seen how these lies get started through cognitive dissonance, through these primal ego defenses. Now, let's talk about the damage. What's the actual cost of living in this state of unreality?
Well, the cost is profound. It's not just about feeling bad. It's about the very structure of yourself beginning to crumble. And we see this reflected even in basic behavioral science around habits.
Right, the idea that the real reason we fail to stick with good habits isn't always about willpower. It's about our self-image.
Exactly. Your ingrained identity narrative gets in the way. If you fundamentally see yourself as, say, someone who isn't disciplined or someone who always fails at diets, then trying to adopt a disciplined habit like going to the gym consistently creates a conflict.
It creates dissonance again. I am undisciplined versus I am going to the gym every day.
And often, the path of least resistance for the psyche is to sabotage the behavior to protect the identity. The habit has to fail. Otherwise, the story you tell yourself about who you are is threatened.
So true change, real progress. It requires more than just changing actions. It requires changing the story we tell ourselves about who we are.
It requires identity change. Sustainable improvement means constantly editing your beliefs about yourself, being willing to upgrade and expand your identity. And that means accepting new, sometimes uncomfortable truths.
Like maybe acknowledging you're capable of more than you thought. or acknowledging a pattern of behavior you'd rather ignore.
Both. It requires integrating these truths, letting go of the fixed, perhaps comfortable, but ultimately false self-image. If you cling too tightly to a deceptive identity, even one where you're the victim, you'll unconsciously find ways to undermine any progress that contradicts it.
And if we refuse that editing process, if we just keep patching over the inconsistencies with more lies,
Then the fragmentation deepens. Your connection to reality itself starts to fray. You stop evolving.
and the clinical endpoint of that is pretty stark. You mentioned Oliver Sacks.
Yes, his work with neurological patients who had lost their sense of reality, sometimes without even realizing it, he described them as the most God-forsaken. It's a terrifying state.
To lose your internal coherence, that continuous thread of who I am and where I am.
It's fundamental disorientation. You're utterly lost because the anchor of self is gone.
But even then, the mind still tries to create some kind of order, right? Even if it's a distorted one.
It does. It's fascinating. Think about something like paranoia. From a psychoanalytic view, the delusions believing people are plotting against you, for instance, can be seen as a desperate, albeit pathological, attempt to rebuild a world.
Rebuild. How so?
When psychological breakdown has shattered your sense of reality, leaving only chaos and meaninglessness, the mind might construct a delusional narrative like a conspiracy just to have some structure, some explanation, however terrifying. It's an attempt to impose a false order onto intolerable chaos, to preserve some semblance of a self in a world.
Wow. So the delusion is a kind of broken coping mechanism, trying to create a false truth because the actual reality has become unbearable or incomprehensible.
In some sense, yes, it's a testament to the psyche's desperate need for coherence, even if it has to manufacture it from untruths. This ties into Jung's ideas, too.
How does Jung fit in here?
Jung talked about the need for cooperation between the conscious mind and the unconscious. If those deeper parts, the primitive drives, the repressed memories, the shadow aspects we lie to ourselves about, if they remain unacknowledged,
They don't just go away.
no, they gain power. They can end up overwhelming your conscious goals and intentions, subtly distorting or falsifying your attempts at authentic living. Your conscious mind might strive for honesty and success, but the unaddressed unconscious patterns keep tripping you up, pulling you towards inauthentic actions.
Which makes sense because lying to ourselves inevitably affects how we relate to other people. You can't build something real on a fake foundation.
Absolutely not. The dating advice example is a perfect everyday illustration. If you behave in ways that aren't true to your actual needs and feelings, like acting deliberately aloof or mysterious when you actually crave connection and reassurance.
You're putting out a false signal. You're lying with your behavior.
Exactly. And what kind of person is likely to respond positively to that false signal of unavailability or game playing?
Probably someone who is comfortable with distance, or maybe someone who is avoidant themselves.
Precisely. The inauthenticity acts as a filter. By pretending to be someone you're not, by lying about your core needs, you inadvertently attract partners who connect with the persona, not the real you. You basically guarantee a relationship dynamic based on that initial deception.
So the lie itself determines the negative outcome.
Often, yes. And this dynamic scales up. It's not just personal relationships. Think about the contrast between, say, easy compliance in difficult situations and genuine moral courage.
The banality of evil versus the banality of heroism.
Right. It's often remarkably easy to go along with things, even unethical things. In certain situations, a toxic workplace, a pressure group, it might just require small acts of dishonesty, looking the other way, telling yourself it's not my problem. That's the mundane nature of complicity.
Just smoothing things over, avoiding conflict, maintaining the status quo, even if it's wrong.
Yes. Whereas heroism, often, is about ordinary people doing something quite simple, but incredibly difficult. Refusing to comply with the pressure, refusing the convenient lie, and acting decisively based on the truth of the situation, based on human dignity.
Even when it's risky.
Especially when it's risky. That refusal requires a radical, non-negotiable commitment to reality, to truth, even when the easy path is deception. They refuse the small, comfortable lie.
Okay, so the stakes are incredibly high. Our connection to reality, our very sense of self. If we want to push back against this erosion, how do we actually do it? How do we start building or rebuilding this radical commitment to truth?
Well, the sources suggest it can start with something surprisingly simple. Making an explicit commitment. Anchoring yourself.
Like the MIT honor hood experiment you mentioned.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic example. You have a situation where cheating is easy, but simply asking participants to read and sign a statement referencing an honor code before they start.
Even though MIT didn't actually have a formal enforced code at the time.
Right. Even the idea of the commitment, made explicit by signing their name to it, was enough. Cheating completely disappeared in that group.
Wow. So just consciously affirming the value of truthfulness, making it salient right before the temptation hits, creates a powerful psychological barrier.
It acts as a potent moral anchor. It brings the abstract value of honesty right into the forefront of the mind at the critical moment.
And this connects back to the social scaffolding idea too, right? If our lies are often supported by our social groups.
Then breaking free requires consciously challenging that scaffolding. Making an explicit commitment to truth, even if it's just to yourself initially, is the first step. Sometimes it means stating a new truth publicly, which might make you inconsistent with your old group, but that's part of breaking the pattern.
You have to be willing to stand apart from the echo chamber that supported the old lie.
It's often necessary. That commitment is the initial radical act.
But making that commitment, especially when it involves facing uncomfortable truths about ourselves, often brings up a huge emotional barrier. Shame.
Ah, yes. Shame. Brené Brown's work is so crucial here. She defines it as that intensely painful feeling or experience of believing we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging.
The fear of being exposed as fundamentally not good enough.
Exactly. And it's universal. But the key thing about shame is that it thrives in silence, secrecy, and judgment. The less you talk about it, the more power it has.
So the lies, the hiding, the pretending, that's like fuel for shame?
Absolutely. The way out, the path towards resilience, involves doing the opposite. It's about finding the courage to own your story.
Owning the story. Meaning what, exactly?
It means not denying or hiding the parts you're ashamed of, but rather acknowledging them, talking about them with trusted people, and integrating them into the larger narrative of who you are. It's about self-acceptance, warts and all. That's framed as the braver choice.
Choosing vulnerability and truth over hiding. It reframes the flaw as just part of your complex humanity.
Precisely. And once you start facing the shame, the next step towards really mastering these patterns involves articulation, being able to put it into words.
Okay, articulation, how does that help?
Transactional analysis offers a really clear measure of what constitutes a psychological cure or recovery. It's achieved when you can clearly articulate why you engaged in the problematic behavior, understanding the historical roots, the psychological triggers, and crucially, how you managed to stop.
So being able to explain the whole process, the breakdown and the recovery, demonstrates real understanding and control.
Yes. There's a principle sometimes stated as, that which is expressed is impressed. The act of putting the experience, the insight, the change process into clear, conscious language helps solidify it. It reinforces the new neural pathways, the new way of being.
It makes it more real, more concrete in your own mind.
Exactly. If you can't really explain how you changed, the change might be less stable. The old patterns might still be lurking, unexamined. Articulation is like the conscious mind claiming mastery over the process.
But speaking of articulation in stories,
Yeah.
memory itself is tricky, isn't it? We're not always recalling objective facts when we tell our stories.
That's a critical point our sources emphasize. Memory isn't like a recording. It's much more like a reconstruction, a mosaic built in the present moment.
We reshape the past based on our current needs, our current understanding.
Constantly. Every time you recall something, you're subtly altering it, selecting certain details, emphasizing certain emotions, weaving it into your current narrative. It's less about perfect recall and more about creating a functional story now.
So a commitment to truth isn't just about trying to remember facts accurately, which might be impossible anyway. It's also about being honest about the story we are telling ourselves about the past today.
Yes. It requires honesty about our present biases, about how we are choosing to interpret events now. Are we constructing a narrative that serves denial or one that serves growth and reality? That self-awareness about our own storytelling is key.
Okay, so we have commitment, facing shame, articulation, and honesty about memory. Is there another layer to this, something deeper?
There is, especially when dealing with deeper wounds like trauma. It involves moving beyond just thoughts and emotions and connecting with the truth held in the body.
The physical sensations, the felt sense.
Exactly. Trauma often involves overwhelming experiences where the body's natural defensive responses, fight, flight, or freeze, get interrupted or blocked. The immense energy mobilized for that defense doesn't just vanish.
It is stuck somehow.
It stays trapped in the nervous system, contributing to things like chronic anxiety, hypervigilance, dissociation, or unexplained physical symptoms. The body is still holding on to the incomplete survival response.
It's holding an unspoken truth about the danger it faced but couldn't fully react to.
Beautifully put. And the healing process in this context involves carefully tuning into those subtle physical sensations, maybe a tremor, a tightness in the chest, a sudden wave of heat or cold.
And allowing the body to,
Well,
finish the response.
yes, allowing those involuntary physical expressions, trembling, shaking, maybe even waves of heat or tears to emerge and complete themselves. It's about letting the body discharge that stored survival energy.
It sounds kind of scary, potentially, letting your body shake or tremble.
It can feel strange, but it's profoundly healing. When that thwarted defensive energy is finally allowed to move through and release, it sends a powerful signal to the deepest, most primitive parts of the brain.
What kind of signal?
A signal that the threat is actually over, that the survival cycle is complete. This discharge often leads to a deep sense of peace, safety, and calm afterwards. It's the body's way of integrating the experience, aligning the physical truth with the conscious understanding that the danger has passed.
So it's integrating the body's reality with the mind's reality.
Precisely. It's bringing all the pieces together.
So this whole process, the conscious commitment, owning the emotional story, articulating it, being honest about memory, and then integrating the body's truth, it feels like a path toward wholeness.
That's exactly the goal. You could look at this entire journey through a Jungian lens as the process of individuation.
Individuation. Becoming a whole integrated self.
Yes, synthesizing all the different parts, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, mind and body, into a functional, authentic personality, the self, as Jung called it. And this radical commitment to truth, in all its forms, isn't just a nice moral idea, it's the psychological engine driving that integration. It's what prevents us from living a split-off, falsified life based on repression and distortion.
Wow. So it really comes back to that core idea. Telling the truth, especially the difficult truths about ourselves, is the active, ongoing process that lets us align who we are internally with what's real externally. It's how we upgrade our identity and escape the trap of denial.
It is. It's that continuous, active commitment to reality orientation. And, makes me think of something B.F. Skinner pointed out. He warned against only looking inward, blaming things like lack of motivation or weak willpower for problematic behavior.
Because that stops us from looking at the environment.
Exactly. It discourages any real investigation into the external factors, the defective contingencies, as he put it, that might actually be reinforcing that behavior.
So if we're really committed to truth, we also need to look honestly at our surroundings.
We have to ask, what systems, what social dynamics, what environmental pressures are currently operating that actually reward our self-deceptions, big or small? What makes lying or avoiding truth the easier path in our daily lives?
And what happens if we start to really question those structures?
That's the provocative question, isn't it? What happens when we apply this radical commitment to truth, not just inward, but also outward, to the systems we live within?
A challenging thought indeed. What structures are rewarding our own daily lives? Thank you. This has been incredibly insightful. A true deep dive into why truth matters so much psychologically.
It was my pleasure. It's fundamental stuff.
We hope you, our listeners, take these ideas and maybe start editing your own story, focusing on that alignment with reality, one truthful step at a time. Until next time.